Penguin Random House Audio presents The Infinite Future by Tim Wirkus. Read for you by a full cast. Forward by Tim Wirkus. Really, this forward should take place in the lamplit reading room of a classy Victorian gentleman's club. Or better yet, in a grand old house on Christmas Eve, where party guests swap strange tales next to a crackling fireplace. As I understand it, those are the two most appropriate locations for receiving a peculiar manuscript whose provenance is nearly as intriguing as its contents. And as it happens, the book you currently hold in your hands began its life as just such a manuscript. In a perfect world, the story of my first encounter with it would take place in a fittingly mysterious locale. Unfortunately, real life is rarely so obliging, and so this story, or at least my very small part in it, begins in the refrigerator section of a Texaco food mart, a few blocks from Weller Bookworks in Salt Lake City. Having worked up an appetite, giving a reading from my first novel at the bookstore earlier that evening, I was currently on the prowl for a local brand of chocolate milk my sister had told me I needed to try before I left town. My flight back to California left first thing the next morning, and so my window of opportunity on the milk was closing fast. A cursory glance at the food mart's glass-doored refrigerators did not bode well. Slim pickings in the dairy department, which comprised one shelf of one refrigerator, practically hidden behind a rotating rack of $5 DVDs. I was leaning in to get a better look when my phone buzzed. It was Danny Laszlo, an old classmate from BYU. "Hi, Danny," I said. I peered into the refrigerator, and in a stroke of good fortune, among the 3 brands of chocolate milk that the food mart carried, was exactly the one I was looking for. "Hey," said Danny, "do you have a minute?" I'd seen Danny in the audience at the reading earlier that evening, but hadn't had a chance to talk to him before the event had ended. "Sure," I said. "To talk in person, I mean," said Danny. This caught me off guard. I had no idea what Danny Laszlo could want to talk about that couldn't be discussed over the phone. And quite frankly, by that point in the evening, I just wanted some chocolate milk and a good night's sleep. "In person?" I said, trying to think of the best way to turn him down. I squeezed past the DVD display and, opening the refrigerator door just wide enough to fit my arm through, reached to the back of the single-file line of chocolate milks to select the coldest container from the rear of the refrigerator. Excuse-wise, I was coming up empty. I said, "Where are you?" "I'm at the gas station," he said. "Just out front." I let the refrigerator door swing shut. "This gas station?" I said. "Yeah," he said. I turned around to look out the windowed front of the food mart. Sure enough, Danny Laszlo stood just outside, phone to his ear. He gave me a sheepish nod and raised his free hand in a short, businesslike wave. "Did you follow me here?" I said. "Well," he said, "I needed to talk to you." I didn't know what to say. Chilled pint bottle in one hand, I stood there for a moment, staring dumbly. We were close enough to see each other, but too far away to talk without using our phones, a situation that never fails to make me very uncomfortable. "I'll be out in a second," I said, and hung up as quickly as possible. Danny Laszlo and I first met back in 2005 in an undergraduate creative writing workshop at BYU. I was a recently returned missionary at the time, still reacclimatizing to civilian life. I'd gotten back so recently, in fact, that I still sported the unmistakable tan lines that result from wearing a collared shirt and tie in the sun all day, every day. I felt conspicuous and awkward, even, or especially, at BYU. I was relieved then, on the first day of class, to spot somebody else sporting missionary tan lines of their own. A tall, solidly built guy who would have been a dead ringer for a young Orson Welles, if not for his light blonde hair. I sat in the desk next to his and introduced myself. He said his name was Danny Laszlo. I asked him if he'd just gotten back from a mission. He said he had, and a bit more small talk revealed that we'd both served in Sao Paulo, Brazil, although in different parts of the city. It quickly became apparent, though, that Danny had little interest in swapping anecdotes of missionary life in Brazil. Instead, he asked me what music I'd been listening to since getting home. I told him the Strokes and the White Stripes, the Shins a little bit. "That's pre-mission stuff, though," he said. "What new stuff are you listening to?" I told him I was still catching up. "You need to be listening to the New Pornographers," he said. "Twin Cinema, just came out a couple weeks ago. Best album of the year. You like power pop?" And so we talked music until class started. Then, while the instructor, the other students, and I went over course objectives, policy, and scheduling, Danny worked his way through a crossword puzzle he kept screened behind his copy of the syllabus. Based on initial impressions, I expected to become good friends with Danny Laszlo. Over the next 3 years, however, our acquaintanceship followed an asymptotic path, in which our interactions grew increasingly genial without ever reaching a state of true friendship. Though chronically affable, Danny maintained a tight seal over the personal details of his life, which kept me and others at a perpetual distance. During this time, I worked as a peer tutor at BYU's Student Writing Center, which employed a team of undergrads, mostly English majors, to dispense unwelcome and occasionally ill-conceived writing advice to our fellow students. When business was slow, the other tutors and I sat around the staff table trading gossip and dog-eared copies of our favorite books. Several of us became very good friends, forming a loose cadre that socialized both on campus and off during our time together at BYU. I bring this up because the Writing Center crowd developed a minor fascination with Danny Laszlo. Most of us had classes with him, and could testify to the skill with which he camouflaged himself behind a blind of false transparency. He might widely broadcast his interests and opinions. He loved James Joyce, thought Bob Dylan and singer-songwriters generally were criminally overrated, and he refused to associate with anyone who'd ever been a member of a high school or collegiate choir. But when it came to concrete details concerning his history or his off-campus lifestyle, he revealed nothing. All of us in the Writing Center crowd wanted to be his friend, or rather, wanted him to consider us a friend, and thereby grant us access to the secret life he concealed so completely. To this end, we repeatedly invited him to our extracurricular parties, and he repeatedly and breezily turned us down. The truth is, in our heart of hearts, none of us believed that Danny's private life would be that much more interesting than any of our own. But still, we wondered. I suppose the point of all this is, I knew Danny at BYU, but not extremely well. Not surprisingly, we lost touch after graduation, and now 10 years later, I was curious to know what he'd been up to in the meantime. Outside the food mart, we shook hands, and I asked Danny where he wanted to go to talk. "Right here's fine," he said. So we stood a few feet from the entrance to the food mart, in a little gap of cement between the pebble-surfaced garbage can and the locked display of propane tanks. "Are you sure?" I said. "Yeah," he said, rubbing his chin. His clothes had that unostentatious but perfectly tailored look that whispers money in polite undertones. Clothes like that are magic, endowing their wearer with an instant boost to their looks, charm, and credibility. Standing this close to him, though, I could see a ragged, haunted quality clinging to his features. If, when I'd first met him, he'd resembled the youthful Orson Welles of the War of the Worlds publicity stills, now he looked like Welles at the end of The Lady from Shanghai, hollow-eyed and shaken. "So, how are you?" I said, genuinely curious. "Fine," he said. Danny had clearly retained his reluctance to discuss any details of his private life. Only with considerable effort did I learn that he was an associate at a prominent Salt Lake law firm, one that even I had heard of. This was a group of attorneys who, by all accounts, shaped the very fabric of the city according to their, or rather, their clients' whims. "Wow," I said. "How do you like it there?" "It's exhausting," he said. "Long hours?" I said. "Yeah," he said. "That's part of it." A car drove slowly past us, pulling in next to the nearest pump. "Listen," said Danny, "I don't mean to change the subject here. Well, actually, that's exactly what I mean to do, so let me get to it. You have connections in publishing, right?" "Kind of," I said. "You don't have to be modest," he said. I was not being modest. "Anyway, you're better connected than I am," he said, "and that's why I wanted to meet this evening."
Sample complete. Ready to continue?